All right. Welcome to the Half Geek Half Human podcast. This podcast is powered by Atiba, an IT consulting and software development firm based in Nashville, Tennessee. I'm Joey Baggett, and I'm joined today by my co-host, Anna Kate Ross.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. We've got a real treat of an interview for our listeners today. We brought in Janet Ivey of Janet's Planet, and she is a really incredible person, has a lot of interesting things to say, has a really cool background. And she's leading the charge to help young ladies get involved with science, technology, engineering, and math. And my eldest daughter recently did one of her after-school camps and had such a blast. So we'll talk about that a bit on the interview. But before we get into the details of this, Joey, what were your thoughts on the interview with Janet?
Yeah, so every interview we do here is a lot of fun, and we learn a lot of cool stuff. But the one thing that really stuck out to me about Janet is just like I was completely in awe of her excitement for the topics, and we could have kept going and kept listening to her talk, and she was such a great guest to have on here. But her passion for space and technology, and it kind of showed me that even as an adult, that you're never too old to get into STEM and to dive deeper into this science and technology. And in prep for the interview, I read a lot of articles on Janet, looked at her website, watched clips of her show on YouTube, the show from PBS. And one thing that I can say about Janet is that she has a love for the youth and the next generation. And I really do feel like that she is going to continue to inspire young ladies and even boys like to just get into technology, to get into science, to learn more, and to always be curious and wondering like what's out there, like what's further, what's more than what we know today. But no, she was just like the whole time I was sitting there listening, I was like, yeah, like keep going. It's so much fun. But anyway, so I got excited. I'm excited to share this interview with everybody else, all the listeners. But Anna Kate, what were your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, same. This exudes her love of space and science. It's just really palpable. But I thought it was neat how she had the PBS show. She has a new book coming out on the topics of science and space and leading girls into those sorts of careers. It serves on several advisory boards. She does speaking events all the time. She has camps you can sign up for. Like the multifaceted nature of her business, I thought was also really impressive. And really speaks to her love of the topic and just embraces her whole background from her theater and performance background, also to her love of science and all of that. So she's just a really interesting person. We were glad to speak with her. And we're super excited to share our interview with Janet. So at this point, just sit back and strap in. And Joey, are you ready to blast off?
Ready to blast off, Anna Kate. Today, we have a really awesome interview with Janet Ivey. I know you guys are going to be really excited to hear some of this. I'm excited just from looking at her website. But first, let me introduce my co-host, Anna Kate Ross. Anna Kate, who do we have today?
Hello. Yes. Well, I'm a project manager here at Atiba, and I am so pleased to introduce Janet Ivey. And as Joey noted, this podcast is all about the intersection between technology, business, and life. And I can't really imagine a better embodiment of a life just bringing interwoven with so many interesting components of technology and science and learning and creativity and business acumen. And we have Janet Ivey. So welcome, Janet.
Thank you guys so much. And, I was so delighted to kind of recall that your daughter, June, was in some of my online classes when it was, 2020, 2021, and we were looking for ways to engage. So imagine that June would sometimes sit in alongside some other Nashville Metro students, and we would talk about science and space. So that's very fun to be here and be talking with June's mom today.
Yes, I know. It's funny how life converges sometimes.
Yes, indeed.
Well, let me just tell our listeners a little bit about who you are. And I'll just give a kind of a quick rundown. I know there's a lot to us, but Janet describes herself as a cosmic educator, a STEM champion, and the guardian and shepherdess of the next generation of space explorers, which I love more than anything. I had to really read that a few times and make sure this is not a formal title. Well, it is a formal title, but it is kind of your own representation.
I gave it to myself. Yeah. Self-dubbed.
So you're the president at Explore Mars, and you're also the CEO of Janet's Planet, which is a space show for kids that has it's an interstitial that's aired on PBS, but also it's manifested itself as an after-school opportunity for children. You're also a member of the National Space Society Board of Governors, alongside other notable names like Buzz Aldrin, Tom Hanks, Hugh Downs, and Lance Bass. You're a keynote speaker, an Emmy Award-winning actress and writer. You've given 2 TED Talks. You're an author. Basically, you have a very cool life, is what it sounds like. And we're so glad to talk to you today.
Well, one of the things that when people ask me, and they do, they're like, what exactly do you do? And so when I say, well, I'm not just one thing, I am an entire galaxy of things. And so, and that's one of the things that I really want to drive home to the students that I get a chance to talk with, teach, mentor, and facilitate these hands-on activities with, is that I think sometimes, and you guys probably know this, maybe working for a tech company or in business, that a lot of times you get pigeonholed as the one thing when none of us are monolithic, right? We're lots of things. It's like I haven't met an astronaut yet that doesn't have some artistic endeavor, whether that's writing or painting or playing the guitar, or like astronaut Katie Colin plays the flute. And so you have all of these varying interests. And so I think I'm trying to cram everything possible into this one good, great, and amazing life and try everything. And that really, for Janet's Planet, when we began, golly, almost 22 years ago, the whole idea, and really the idea happened when I was at Opryland. And I don't know if any Nashvillians out there listening, there used to be a theme park here. It was quite rad. And from 92 to 97, I got this job. They called and says, hey, we got this thing. There'll be kids. You'll be performing with kids, for kids. There'll be a costume character and a puppet. And from that first day in 1992, I was like, oh my gosh, my 10-year-old self is at home. And setting out again, people are going to go, how did you end up in science or space? And with a degree from Belmont University in music and theater. Well, funny thing that great that your podcast is Half Geek Half Human, describes me perfectly. So thank you for that. Uh, all of us, please unite here as we might identify like that. But I'd always loved space based on my 5th grade teacher, Miss Ernestine Yarborough. And so as I entered this endeavor, I still thought I was going to sing. At one point, I was part of a group called Summer Rose and Ivy, and we were on the pitch sheets for Mercury. They had just signed Shania Twain and Toby Keith. We would have been, even if the deal had gone through, Polygram and Mercury eventually merged, and so the deal went away. But we would have even been before the Dixie Chicks. But the whole time this thing is kind of progressing and the possibilities drawing more, possible, I was going, oh, but I'll miss working with the kids. So when the deal went away, I was never really saddened by it, because I felt like I had found kind of my purpose. And so out of that, I looked around, the park was closing. What can I do with this newfound love of working with kids? And all that was on in the late 90s happened to be either Bill Nye the Science Guy, or Beekman's World. But there wasn't a female going, dun, 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 shepherdess of the next generation of the space explorers. So I was like, there should be a female touting this, and not just the female sidekick who's like, what? I don't know what you're talking about. Explain it to me. You know what I mean? I was like, no, there should be the smartest person. Like, there should be the female. So that's really where I planted the flag and came up with Janet's Planet. And, along the way, it's gone from interstitials to some full half hours, to a live touring show, to a live, in-person camp, and then transitioned in the middle of, during COVID, to something online, what we called it Janet's Planet Astronaut Academy. So I will just tell you, my planet knows how to pivot.
Yes, you seem to be the master of that with all the different iterations you've had. So so Janet's Planet, as you mentioned, my daughter June participated in the virtual version of that in the high COVID days in 2020, where no one was leaving the house. And that was something we so look forward to. And knowing more about your background of performance and your creative background, I can so see how you've manifested that with this, some learning for kids. It was so entertaining. And we were so thankful to have an opportunity like that. So tell us about this part of the work. How is Janet's Planet functioning now, and what kind of kids are you working with, and how does that work?
So here's like basically my sort of modus operandi, if you will. I grew up in the era of like the electric company with, Rita Moreno and um, Morgan Freeman. And it was entertaining television that you still learned how to read and literacy and all these kinds of facts. So I think based on what I loved as a kid, and I realized as I was doing Janet's Planet, how do I want to learn? I don't want to learn and be just the sage on the stage. I want it to be super interactive. I want the kids to feel like they are leading the way, like they're the experts, and oh, teach me. And oh, wow, that's fantastic. And so sometimes I think it's like based on some fantastic teachers that I had as a kid. Again, shout outs to Mrs. Dorothy Davidson and Miss Rosella Hall, my sweet librarian, Miss Ernestine Yarbrough, these amazing women who made me want to learn and made it fun. So there's the basis of how I've always thought about it. Then enter Janet, the actress, and full of this kind of quirky energy that actually is best suited for kids because they get me. Uh, and really, it's like if you would have told me, truthfully, guys, back even in 2019, if you'd have said to me at some point that year, hey, I know we did these camps this summer, but hey, why don't we think about teaching online? I'd have been going, are you nuts? No, I don't want to do that. Talking and sitting in my office all day on the computer teaching. No. But come March of 2020, the world's shutting down. A couple of days into it, I'm like crying in my coffee, going, I can't take it. It was just already getting to me. And I was like, so however you believe in whatever people's faith construct or not is, the divine download or the divine prompt and the little poking in the middle of my back was, you need to be with kids. And I was like, you're right. So, and I'm so dumb. This is before I knew that you could get Zoom bombed if you put your Zoom information out there publicly. But I was desperate, and these were desperate times. So I put it out on a Tuesday and said, hey guys, who wants to come learn about the solar system? Join me tomorrow at this Zoom link. And I had 26 kids show up March 17th, 2020. The next day, we had 76. And I was like, oh, holy cow. And again, naively, I thought, well, we'll do it for a couple of weeks till this whole thing pans. And so we ended up doing it for 9 weeks through the end of that school year. We actually held an online graduation. We served over 1,200 kids. We never charged anything. I figured if all of my income, because 2020, prior to everything that happened, was looking like going to be my best year yet with Janet's Planet. All of the live stage bookings, all of the camps, it was going to be tremendous. Then it all shut down. But what I learned in that moment, and then the gift of giving and doing that for those 9 weeks, a friend calls and says, hey, you need to apply for this grant that NASA's offering. It's everything you're already doing. And gratefully to NASA's Next Gen STEM program, I was able to, from September 2020 through June 2021, serve almost 10,000 kids around the country with their curriculum. And Metro Nashville Schools was part of that. So I basically, yeah. So that was, again, it was just one of these things that nobody's ever going to ask me for necessarily the business plan. I've always had the idea of where I wanted it to go, but sometimes in business and in life, you just happen to have go, this is what is directly in front of me. I'm probably being given a fantastic gift that I know not how it's all going to play out yet, but let me follow this. And still to this day, there are kids who joined me those first few weeks of March 20, or in those early weeks of March 2020, that are still my students, still staying in contact with me. This past year, we had Lucia, who came to my camp in 2019, who won the NASA Junior Lunabotics competition. 3 other my online kids, they've never met each other like face to face, but they formed a team and won the FAA Minecraft Airport Design Challenge. Another kiddo in Knoxville has just won the state's 3M challenge. And so, again, it's not me. I don't want to take credit for this at all. What I believe that I stumbled upon is that when you give kids a chance to be the best of who they are, encourage that as they are, and you go, hey, and here's this opportunity. Maybe you'd like to try this or not, because you don't have to. And then not having to, and the not expectation, but here it is. If you want to, let me know if I can help you, blah, blah, seem to create this like, oh, okay, let me see what I can do. So I'm still learning, still keeping in touch with any kids who want to reach out. It definitely has slowed because as life has gone back to what we now, I guess, would call the new normal, kids are busy and things like that. So we're trying to meet once a month just to make sure our space family stays intact.
Yeah, I love that.
So I have something just to ask on this, and really a few things to point out. So one, you mentioned Opryland, which I grew up in Nashville. Opryland was back in the 90s was my spot. And oddly enough, me and a guy were talking about Opryland this morning, and I went and looked up like POV footage from all the roller coasters like Chaos and Wabash Cannonball, and it's like, man, I went on a nostalgia trip today. So it's cool to meet someone who like had an impact on kids like me that was there. But I will say, so I've got a almost 10-year-old daughter, and I've got an 8-year-old son. My 8-year-old son is obsessed with Minecraft. So you saying that and like how that comes into play and how a video game has become this source of learning and even competitions. But my daughter, so she has had this obsession, and it reminded me when you held up that mug a second ago. Can you show that mug one more time?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So she has been obsessed with galaxy like colors and like the deep purples and the pinks and the blues, and so I'm seeing this like interest in the galaxy and how things look and like even your backdrop. And so I guess my question to you would be, you see a young lady like that who she's very smart, very mature for her age. And I'm sure June's mom would ask the same question, and that's what I'm going to call you for the rest of the time, Anna Kate. It is, how do you take someone with a spark of that interest, and like what's a good way to get them involved to like really explore this interest in space and our galaxy and what's beyond just Earth?
So the very first thing that I would do, I would like immediately, your daughter and I would hit it off, and then I'd go, "Hey, do you know a really great idea? Let me tell you." And you take a canvas and tops off of bottles, and we get some spray paint, and we could spray paint the galaxy. I can definitely send you guys a link to this. It is so fun. You may want to make sure that your kids are all covered and either wearing some really old clothes when you do it. But then I would take them to see the Hubble website or the James Webb Telescope website. When you think about this, again, astronomers, even before the James Webb was launched back on, Christmas of 2021, it's like they discovered that the center of the universe contains a chemical called ethyl fulmate. Well, guess what? Ethyl fulmate is what gives raspberries their distinctive kind of smell and taste. Ethyl fulmate is also in rum. So, okay, so maybe you don't tell your 10-year-old that, but it's pretty cool that the center of the universe might taste like raspberries, right? So, what I like to do and tell parents all the time, there's slew.com. I know their director of education. There are free versions. Your kids can get on there in different basic programs, and they can begin to like go, I want to look at this part of the sky. And there are many things that are archived even on my Janet's Planet official YouTube channel, where we have talked with people that have worked on the James Webb Telescope and the different things that are out there. So, to any parent out there, and to your 8-year-old, guess what? He should form a team, because the FAA will announce in November at an event we're going to be at. They have graciously decided to come to the Cynthia Woods Mitchell Pavilion. I'll be in the Woodlands, Texas from November 9th through the 13th doing a children's festival. The FAA is going to be there with a booth, and they're going to launch and announce the FAA Minecraft Airport Design Challenge. And they have had kids as young as 5 and 6 participate. Your son can do it solo, or he can form a team. And again, it's this great way that they do it. They do it in creative mode, so it doesn't get destroyed. But they have to, like, so being here in Nashville, they could redesign a regional airport, or say the Nashville International, and build it all in Minecraft with a future kind of forward thought process. Like, where will we have the autonomous cars drive up to arrival or departure? Where will we park our flying cars? Those kinds of things. My students who won, and it was weird. I'd been asked to be keynote way long before I knew they were going to win the darn thing. So I couldn't even brag on them as I'm being the keynote for the online event this spring. But they chose bioluminescence to be the way that they marked their runway. So they were being green, and they were using plants to be the runway lights, and bioluminescence. So brilliant stuff. And they're building it all in Minecraft. So I would say to your daughter, I'll even send another link. There's a NASA STEM Kids Club that meets almost every Sunday, and you can base it on grade and choose a course. But if you're going, I don't know if we want to do that on a Sunday, I don't know, whatever we want to do. If your kid's showing some interest, make sure that you are, constantly introducing possibilities. Or I say this and people always go, I can't believe she just offered this, but email me at janet@janetsplanet.com. I offer this all the time. And statistically, only about 1 to 5% of you actually might do it. So if I get overwhelmed, I'm going to be like, finally, they took me up on my offer. But one of the things that I absolutely love to do, is to get a girl interested in science and to tell them that it's like, smart is the most awesome thing you can be, and that you are empowered to be smart. Vanderbilt did a study a few years back that says 10 is the new 15, which is scary, which means our age of innocence is lessening. And it could even possibly be younger than that, relatable to those kind of at that age range. Again, scary. And that still, here in 2022, in the 21st century, we still have girls trying to figure out by 6th, 7th, 8th grade, are they going to stay the course of being smart, or are they going to be popular? And somehow we've got to spread the message that smart is where it's at, because then you can make your own career, make your own money. And but it's like, for that to still be there, you go, that's culturally something we need to kind of address. Another thing I love to do is to go into communities that might not otherwise have opportunity for space and science, or might not have somebody that's really interested in that. So I try to mentor and everything. But for anybody's kid out there, whatever they're interested in, let them explore it. Even if they don't hang with the flute for long, maybe they take a piano lesson, maybe they take a dance lesson, maybe they take a fencing lesson, or want to build puppets. There's so many great resources and so many great people who are willing to connect with kids. It's been interesting. One of the most profound things that happened because of COVID, maybe the silver lining, is that as we were all home, I met so many incredible people that I would not otherwise have met. And so I can hey, I'm a space expert, and I worked on the Mars Perseverance rover. You want me to come and talk to your kids? Yeah, sure thing. Love it. And and so now to have those kinds of friends, and to be able to go, hey, I got a kid. Would you just email them? And to have that network of people is really profound. And I think for any good half geek, half human being out there, if you love what you do, it's I think it's imperative that even if it's one kid, if it's a couple of kids in your own neck of the woods, do your part, spread the word, be part of the solution. Because I will say, teachers, we should all bow to them. They should be paid as professional football athletes, because they're doing the hard work and they're under incredible, almost impossible demands. Oh, if you guys don't make these testing things, we lose our funding. And it's in my book, testing should be erased, because here's what I found. Kids were engaged when if they wanted to be, they could be. And granted, there are some you got to push, but the incessant testing has to end, and it has to go to just teaching and really teaching kids how to critically think. And that's what maybe I'm most passionate about is like, it worked for Da Vinci, right? He let his art inform his science inform his art. So you can be both artist and scientist. But we need to know how to build and innovate and invent. And because technology is moving at such exponential rates, if we are not doing that for this generation of kids, what are they going to be doing? Like, great that you can pass a test, but I want to know that you can innovate something or that you can build something. I love to talk, as you can tell. So one of my absolute best stories from this summer's camp came from a 12-year-old neurodiverse girl who said she was a funny kiddo. And she was like, I didn't know if I was going to like this camp. And you never know what's going to come after that. She's like, but you know what? I wish school were more like this. And I was like, really? Tell me more. How so? And she's like, well, at school, they just make you like memorize facts and take a test. But here, we're actually learning how to build something. And I never even thought I could be an engineer, but maybe I can.
Oh, that's so cool. So let me ask you a question about that. That must have been really satisfying to you. I mean, to answer Joey's question, it sounds like to keep his daughter and really any kid engaged is help them realize things that they're interested in, kind of point them in that direction. But when it comes to school, especially these STEM and STEAM programs at schools, there is a lot of academic motivation to push people, or at least open up worlds of math, science, engineering, technology, arts, that kind of thing to students. But what do you think some of the barriers are too? Like, why does it drop off, especially maybe with girls? You mentioned some social pressures that might come into play, but what are some of the other barriers that keep people from pursuing careers in STEAM and keep going with it? Maybe you're interested as a kid, but it falls off later on. What are some of those barriers, do you think?
I mean, things that I hear often are things like, well, my parents said I'll never be that. Or they'll have a teacher say, well, you're not smart enough to do that. You need to consider something else. They get discouraged. Another thing is representation. And NASA's doing a beautiful job of like, even during this, past September, which was kind of like Heritage Hispanic, Hispanic Month, and showcasing all of the engineers and different folks that are Hispanic working at NASA. And so, again, I think we've got to showcase and show more diverse people in those positions. We need to, again, if you are, if you're a tech person, if you're, an art or graphic design person, and it's like, if you go, why aren't girls entering this? Or why aren't more diverse kiddos getting involved? Most likely they don't even know that these things exist. I do an entire talk on careers in space and talk about everything from 3D printing to, hey, do you like to sew? Do you like fashion? Well, SpaceX has got a way more modern kind of spacesuit than NASA. Pretty cool. Somebody had to design that. And they start going, wait a minute. And I was like, and hair tends to float all over the place in microgravity. So maybe somebody's got to be the best hair designer of space hair, space hairdos. And so we get a little silly, but at the same time, we're going to 3D print food and kids' eyes will go, oh. And I was like, you could print your own pizza in about 60 seconds. They're like, I want one of those. So part of it is like making leaps of fancy, but it is like, in truth, most of what I'm talking about isn't a leap of fancy anymore. It's actually technology that is being worked upon and tested on the International Space Station. So I think it's just exposure. And if your child is interested, reach out to somebody like myself or somebody that that you want, hey, I wonder if they've got anybody in their network. At this point, I figure social media, LinkedIn, those kind of connections should be used for good. And it's like Mr. Rogers had this great thing that basically where he put out this kind of like call to action for every good human, that if you are here on this planet, part of your job is to take care of those coming up behind you. So pick your age group, pick those kids that you naturally kind of like have an affinity with, and go talk to a school. It's like I can't imagine a STEM, STEAM, any school in this country that if you went to the front office and said, hey, I am in coding, I'm in tech, I am a designer, I'm an engineer, can I come talk to your third, fourth, fifth graders, your K through second graders, your seventh graders, whatever it is, they're not going to say no. And maybe you do it once and you get hooked, or maybe you do it 3 times a year and you go, that way I've told my story, maybe somebody out there. And maybe it's one, maybe it's five, but I can't, I feel like that it's like we can't just rely on it has to happen in the school with those teachers. They're doing their most amazing good work possible. So we're called to kind of support them in their endeavors. They're always looking for experts to talk with students. Those kinds of things I think are so important. But if you're a parent and you're going, I don't know anybody, reach out, go on LinkedIn, find the person that, you'd want your kid to like know. I can tell you that, and I don't know, I mean, maybe I just have a good power of persuasion, but this happened even more so since COVID. You reach out to somebody's like, hey, I know you're busy. Hey, would you have time to do a Zoom with the kid, or would you have time to write him an email? An email is sometimes better. But imagine we did this for a kid down in Florida who is African American, really wants to go to space. And so I reached out to former astronaut Charlie Bolden, and he was former NASA administrator. I mean, his story's incredible. And Charlie had been part of a webinar for the Human to Mars Summit. And I said, Charlie, I know you're a busy guy, but if you were to send Christopher an email and say and encourage him, unbelievable, because Christopher had done this video about and it was really charming at 12-year-old self talking about the endeavors of space. So he had already impressed General Bolden, and he did. And it's like the kid printed it out and has it framed on the wall. I mean, imagine that. So I think there's a couple of things when you talk about why it drops off. I mean, naturally, it's like for females, it's like if you stop for a while to have a family or attend to those things, I tend to think that we need to rethink how women can re-enter that workplace if they take time and want to make that family. There should be those, kinds of things that you shouldn't lose your space. So there are also some other social kinds of things to do. But I think the biggest thing between K through 12 and going into college is it's like giving them as much exposure as possible, finding that representation that will resonate with your child, and then, helping them find their mentor, or, kind of like assisting them with that process. Because again, other statistical stuff says all it takes is one good human in the life of a child to redirect that kid in the most positive direction. So that's my call to action for adults.
Yeah, those are some good calls to action, to just really try to embrace those interests and reach out and stick your neck out there and ask the question. That's cool.
And as my my granddaughter once said, I was talking to I said, why should girls love science, Miette? And she was like, well, you'd have to know her. She's hilarious and I love her to like pieces. And she was like, well, if you happen to be a girl and you don't have access to science, then, well, you should just, do it anyway and, change the world and change their minds. And I was like, oh my God, yes, do it anyway, change the world and change their minds. And that might encapsulate your question best.
That's awesome.
I love how you talk about children like they are peers instead of just someone to be taught and molded, and that it's like the innocence of a child, and like sometimes their most basic response to questions is usually the best answer to it on how to get something done. Just like you were just talking about your granddaughter, it's like just do it. Like, I think Nike built a pretty decent brand on just doing it. So it's really cool to see that, and to see there's a lot of changes going on in the space, where like with James Webb and the telescope, that was one of the more recent things to happen. But I also saw, and I don't know if this is the next thing coming, but about Mars Artemis, and putting a woman and a person of color on the moon for the first time. But is there any one of the questions is there anything else coming up, like any big events like the James Webb getting our pictures from that? Is there anything like that coming up here soon?
Well, coming up, and again, they've changed the launch date. I was very fortunate to be down on the Space Coast during August, and you were waiting with bated breath and surrounded by engineers who had worked on this mission for, decades. And to have it scrubbed because of that hydrogen leak was rather, it was disappointing, but it was interesting to watch because these people are engineers and they're like, you know what? We can't go before everything is perfect. So the new launch window is between November 11th and November 27th. And so I am very hopeful. And my hope for the Artemis 1 mission, it's going to be uncrewed. It'll be on about a 40 some odd day kind of mission. It will go kind of like a docking orbit around the Earth. Once all systems are ready to go there, it will head on out to the moon. And then what's interesting, it's going to go about 40,000 miles further than the moon, farther than any kind of like spacecraft has ever gone before. And I think that will be the moment when it returns safely and all systems are go. That's going to be this generation's Apollo moment. And then to see Artemis 2, then Artemis 3, and when people finally put boot prints back on the moon after, golly, let's see, 1972, almost 50 years, because in December of this year will be the last Apollo mission. I think it's going to change everything. I think you're going to see in the next 20 to 30 years, and people are forecasting this already, you're going to see the space economy become $1 trillion business, but you're going to see students get engaged, just like those students and people of 1969 when they first saw Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong on the moon, that catapulted their desire and interest in space. I think James Webb is doing it. I think James Webb is going to continue to rock our world with these images like we've never seen them before. When we can like crash land a spacecraft into an asteroid and change its orbit. I mean, that's the stuff of like, science fiction. But, but coming up, there's going to be an incredible mission to the moon of Saturn. Titan is the moon that it's going to, and it's this incredible, like weird quadcopter that is going to fly around. And the atmosphere is so dense and the gravity so low on Titan that if we could just don a pair of wings as a human, we could fly about. So imagine the ease of that quadcopter. I mean, Ingenuity on Mars, they only expect it to fly it about 5 times. It still keeps going. When we get the samples that Perseverance is currently, drilling up there, and when that next 2026 Mars rover goes, oh, by the way, you can send your name on the 2026 Mars rover. If you just Google "send my name to Mars" on the next rover, they basically etch it on this little chip. And I think this last time, I can't even remember how many millions of names were on the Perseverance rover. But when we get those samples back, so the Mars 2026 rover land there sometime 2027, go around, capture all of those samples. Then the European Space Agency has a little capsule that will fly it back to Earth. Humans will hold actual Mars samples in their hands and do research. So those are some of the things. It's like the from OSIRIS-REx that touched down on an asteroid back in 2020. We should have data from that coming back here soon. So space is quite busy, and there are experts trying to think about how we can have space tourism. And I'm not just talking about going, a suborbital flight going up and back, but there's a company called Orbital Assembly. And I would think it was science fiction if my friend, one of my dear friends who taught alongside me during 2020, she's now the CEO of this company. And it's basically, it looks like an orbiting space station, and it's a space hotel. And they're building these parts out so companies can do it for research, or you can go and kids, we're not going to Disney World this year. We're going to go to space. How about them apples? So it's still, but when you start to see what people are planning, yeah. And I think I'm hoping in my lifetime, I see one of the kiddos that I've had a privilege of saying, way to go build that rocket, go to Mars. I hope in my lifetime I see human footprints on Mars, but I definitely think it will be in the lifetime of our children.
Yeah. And on that point, I read somewhere that actually tell us, why do you think it's important for humans to get to Mars? What's your answer? Why is that like important for our species?
You know what? It's like, I think, I don't know, this probably sounds too trite. Basically, exploration is in our DNA. But think about this. It's like, like all of the rovers, Sojourner, Curiosity, Spirit, Opportunity, Perseverance. Yeah, they can do incredible work, but it's like they can move like inches. And it's like the delay in time from the time they get the prompt to bounce off the orbiter down to the actual craft to perform the task, to send the message back that they've performed the task. I mean, I think in a certain amount of time, it took, what Spirit or Opportunity to go the length of maybe 4 miles. A human could have done it in a couple of days, and it was months of back and forth for that. So when humans can walk about, now many people are going to go, Mars is hard. It's an incredibly terrible like environment. Why would we want to go there? Maybe we, do a mission where it's like we go down to the surface, we do some things, we have some orbiting station above Mars. Maybe we just visit one of the moons of Mars, land there, because that might be safer than actually the kind of like really atmosphere and all of the perchlorates that are in the soil of Mars. So it's like maybe there's a various, there are any number of kind of like proposed ways we can't humanly go to Mars. But I think when we see that, then the species has kind of a lifeboat planet. We have the ability to go, wow, if we're capable of this, what might we solve for Earth by going to Mars? And I think of all things, the benefit for Earth is where we need to be thinking why Mars might be important. We figure out how to create food from a bioreactor or a cellular bioreactor, we might just have solved food scarcity here on Earth. We figure out how humans can be less impervious to radiation that's going to happen if you're on the Mars surface very long. We solve something here and cure cancer here on Earth. And so for me, it's like going there is always with eyeballs turned firmly back to this blue ball that is perfect and has all of the best conditions for sustaining life. And so, how that might play into our human consciousness of going there only potentially improves life here on Earth and an appreciation for what it is, or to see that we would go not as one nation, but as a collaborative kind of team of nations. Could that somehow, I mean, again, this is entirely utopian, but that's where I'm going to live because that's what I want, is that could we finally see that we are indeed better together? And again, I know that's altruistic, and humans at the core of them will still love to comment on a negative post more than a positive one. So maybe it's not going to happen. But my hope is this generation that's coming up right now, the K through 12 kiddos, they've got a lot of power, they've got a lot of passion, and they've got a lot more compassion for their friends and fellow humans in ways that I think are quite inspiring. And to your point, you know, about talking to them as if they're humans and not as kids, just as like, hey, my peers, like, what do you think about it? What it does at that moment, it's like, whoa, huh? You want my opinion? You're letting me comment? And even if it's half formed, even if it's not the most scientific, they now feel engaged. It's like you've invited them in. And that's what I see a lot. A few years back, I did a thing, was out of recycled material. You really want to have your kids have fun? Tell them to go, like, clean everything, or at least get most of the clean stuff out of the recycling bin and build something, innovate something. What do we need around the house? Make a prototype and come and talk to me about it. But we were doing this, but only we were saying, okay, here's a bunch of recycled materials and make your own spacecraft. And this kid was like, oh my gosh, he was in it, man. It was like a cereal box and a coffee filter, but he was telling me the name of it and where it was going to go, and it had an elevator. So I videotaped him explaining it. It was rad. I put it up on social media, and I will be doggone if some snooty physicist, a learned gentleman, makes a comment and says, well, you should explain to the kid there won't be an elevator on there. And I was like, listen, brother, you might be a physicist, but this kid may figure out how to put an elevator on there. So thanks. And now, and I just go, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
That is the quickest way to stop creativity and engagement, is to tell a person no. It's the same way for an acting improv game. The fastest way to shut down a system or a scene is to say no, because improv is always about yes and. So I keep going back and kind of like marrying this path for myself that's both art and science, is that it's like if we use this, the kind of like basics of improv, like yes and then add on, you're going to eventually get a kid to some place where they may really super be engaged. But I think that's why I do it more than anything, because a lot of times you're going to see their genius in ways that you wouldn't have experienced it before if you hadn't engaged them and asked their opinion. But also because too many times we adults assume that we know the very best answer. But I don't think we always do. It's like we should at least listen, because it might eventually populate into some new innovation.
I think that's so cool to just again to re-hit on like talking to children like their peers, and yeah, that may not always be the smartest answer in the world. You never know what's going to come out of a kid's mouth, but if it, anything, you'll be good for a few laughs. And you know, we were going to wrap up. Like I was going to ask the question of you know, what advice would you give to parents, but I think honestly, the question's irrelevant now because what you just said about the encouragement and the yes, and I think that a lot of parents will listen to this, or even just business people listen to this podcast, and they're also parents, and they'll be like, maybe I need to give my kids more of a chance. And it might inspire people. It's inspiring me. I mean, to maybe listen to my children a little bit more. I don't know how you get them to clean, like you mentioned earlier, but hey, we'll figure that out at some point.
No, it's like, it's like you do it in a timer and you make it a game. It's like gamify that cleanup job, man. Like gamify that and then promise them a talk with an astrophysicist. We'll arrange it. Do you know what I mean? There's like some, I'm not saying everything has to be rewarded, but it's like, that's how I get things cleaned up at camp. We gamify who can pick up 15 things in like 37 seconds. And, I will tell you this last line, and I love this quote. It's from a book by Harvard professor Tony Wagner, who wrote a book called Creating the Innovators of the Future. And in it, he says, we must let our children play. And in the midst of their play, they may find their passion. And in the midst of their passion, they may very well find their purpose. And so drag out the cardboard boxes and let them build their habitat on Mars. Pull out the recycling bin and let them innovate and, give them something that's like, wonder if we could create a robot that could make us pizzas, and then see what they create and just play. Yeah, just play.
Well, in our last minute here, I know your latest book has just won a recent award. Can you tell us about that a little bit?
Shameless self promotion. Here is Higher, Faster, Longer. It's the story of Wally Funk, aviator extraordinaire. She was a member of Mercury 13. She started this process at age 19 of wanting to go to space. NASA didn't allow women in until, nearly 20 years after the Russian had a female cosmonaut go to space. But at age 83, Wally made it to space with Jeff Bezos. So this is the second book in our series, Unsung Genius. Again, all about touting, kind of giving voice to women in science that you may not have heard of. The first one's Daring to Dig, a story about Mary Anning, the fossil hunter, a female paleontologist before the word paleontologist had even been invented. But this is kind of series to shout out to all the girls. We give space in the back for them eventually to write a letter to their future genius self, telling about all the great things they may invent or innovate one day.
And how's the best way to get those books?
You can go to my website, janetsplanet.com, or Barnes and Noble carries them, and or most any bookseller that you have. I like sending people over to Barnes and Noble. I got friends there, but both titles you can find either on my website, janetsplanet.com, or at barnesandnoble.com.
Well, I got to say, we really enjoyed, and I saw this on an article that was out there. I really enjoyed talking with you, Interplanet Janet. I think it's been a lot of fun. Anna Kate, June's mom, do you want to close us out today?
Yes. Well, we're so appreciative for your time, Janet. This has been a wonderful interview. And we'll leave some show notes in the show notes about some of the links and resources that you provided to us. And we just really appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Let your mind revolve around this thought. The universe is always expanding. Let your mind do the same. And that's the view from Janet's Planet.
You've been listening to Half Geek Half Human.